diverse set of behaviours.
He Māori aho.
Your single source of truth.
The words don't put it to me.
My husband is Samoan, so talofa. Ngā tikanga reo, tikitahi.
Che Guevara of New Zealand's Parliament, Chloe Slaughter.
Penny houses.
And it's communist.
He whakatū future.
They've got maka, running holidays.
Kia ora tātou,
Kia
no
ora.
mai, hara mai, welcome back to another episode of the All Report, episode 6. I'm Pere, huriwai-seger, joined by my beautiful, lovely wife, Samah. Kia ora.
Kia ora, everyone.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode, and I just want to say first and foremost, an acknowledgement to those working in our public services, in our schools, those who are going to suffer from the whānau order cuts, all of those things, and e ngā mate o te wā, o te rā, o te marama, o te tau, hara mai, haere. To all of those who have passed away recently, mihi atu kia rātou, just an acknowledgement of them, and an acknowledgement of all of you for coming. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We've got an awesome show today. I am going to be covering some of the changes to the school curriculum, and Samah, you're going to be talking about...
School lunches / privatisation / the health sector.
Ka pai. And we're going to start as well with a bit of a wrap-up of some of the latest headlines.
Just some. We're just going to start with some quick rounds of having a look at some of the headlines and stuff that's going on at the moment before we jump into our deep dives for the day. And yeah, we're trying a new way of displaying our information. That's what we've been working on, and apologies for missing our stream last night. We are trying our best to stick to our 6 p.m. Fridays. That's the time we're advertising, but every now and then it's going to happen. So apologies for that. And part of the reason is this new layout. So hopefully everyone likes it. And as usual, any feedback, criticism, everything is welcome. So yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. And just a big mihi atu to Tulua Wilson, our comment moderator. She was available yesterday, and they've made themselves available today as well. So just a big mihi to Tulua and those who are in the comment section. If you're going to be commenting, just remember, keep everything above board, keep everything tika. And yeah, we like to keep it a nice community space for everybody. So again, glad to have y'all here. Hope you enjoy the night. And shall I throw it over to you, Samah?
Sure, let's get into it. So yesterday we had an announcement from Labour. It was their big announcement after a long period of introspection and many a focus group, and they've finally come out to tell us that they're going to campaign on being national light. They came out and their whole thing was, we're going to keep the policies. We're not going to be like this government slashing everything Labour did. Of course, as soon as you hear that alarm bells start ringing, sounds like they're going for the centrist vote, and you leave them a little bit of a possibility that they just mean that in good faith, and they only mean infrastructure projects and things where they don't want to disrupt jobs, and we can all agree with that. But then they get specifically asked for a couple of examples, and this is what Hipkins says.
Chris Hipkins also promised not to unpick all the current government's work if it wins the next election, unlike, he says, what the coalition did.
We're not going to repeat that same mistake. If projects are underway when we come into government, we will keep them going, because I'm not going to throw those people and their jobs on the scrap heap.
While that's largely infrastructure related, other areas are also safe.
Would you get rid of the ban on gang patches?
No, we're not going to change that.
Would you scrap the fast track legislation?
We had a fast track regime in place before it, so we're not opposed to fast tracking.
A fresh perspective with a somewhat refreshed lineup.
So not really a fresh perspective, is it? It's just the same perspective that National had and the same perspective that Labour had before them. And it's funny with the fast track comments, because I've seen in the House, National constantly brings up the fact that it was Labour that brought in the fast track during COVID, and that they were just building on that. And here, Labour is effectively giving them that point and agreeing, yes, we did set the groundwork for you to come and slash our democracy even further.
Yeah, that's not what I wanted to hear. But at the same time, I think it's good that Labour are playing the centre-right option in this case. People just need to remember that the way that we pull Labour over is to get more votes for Te Pāti Māori and for the Greens, and that a vote for, you know, those traditional coalition partners of Labour, that's not going to harm the potential to get that coalition over the line. All it's going to do, if we have a stronger Greens, stronger Te Pāti Māori, all that's going to do is their policies, Te Pāti Māori and Greens, will be more reflected in what Labour supports. So, I don't support our government going more to the right, but I think in terms of how, the psyche of voters works, I do want to see those people who voted national last election back with Labour. But we can't give too much energy to Labour. We need to keep reminding people that the only way that Labour is actually going to change is if we get a bigger coalition bloc that they have to side with, that they have to make deals with. And the only thing that gives those parties leverage is if they are stronger parties. So I don't want people to get caught up in this idea that, oh yeah, Labour's back and they're in a new groove and da-da-da-da-da. We can give them some aspects of support, but our main support needs to be with those parties that have stronger policies to look after our public services, our environment, te tiriti, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the only way we're going to do that is if we can push Labour more to the left.
Yeah, I think a little bit of possibly the narrative from the United States has sunk into our psyche a little bit, with people believing that third-party votes are wasted votes. And that's just not the case in an MMP environment in New Zealand. A vote for Greens or Te Pāti Māori will go towards a coalition with Labour. So it just makes sense, if you want to push Labour to the left, to vote for those parties. They're going to end up in a coalition with them anyway. And on the gangs point, not surprising at all. We have seen Labour continuously agree with the government's anti-gang moves and agree with their hard-on-crime moves, and in fact criticise them for not doing more in that space. They stand up in the House and they criticise National for not having more cops faster and for not being harder on crime. So I'm not surprised that they said they would keep the gang patch. I am a little bit surprised that he didn't say outright no to the fast track bill.
Yeah, I'm surprised there. Yeah.
But it is what it is. That's what we're working with. We're working with National Light and National. So that's the announcement from Labour.
Kapa.
Another story, this one's a great one. Activists, as part of Peace Action Aotearoa, scaled a building in Christchurch to protest the weapon company establishing themselves in New Zealand, growing their links with the police, and potentially even arming our police force. They put this little compilation video together, which I think is fun. So let's have a look.
We don't want no guns! Enough is enough!
Who made the bullets? Who made the guns? Naya. Who made the bullets? Who made the guns? Naya. Who made the bullets? Who made the guns? Naya. Who made the bullets? Who made the guns? Naya. Who made the bullets? Who made the guns? Little boys having funds, government funds. Walk, stop, loading cops. No black shots, just black shot. Disarm the police. Disarm the police. Disarm the police. Disarm the police.
Diss on the police?
Disarm the police.
Diss on the police? Oh, well, that was a cool video. Good on our kids, eh? Good on the rangatahi.
Yeah, they're doing great work. And this company supplies the Israeli Defense Forces or the Israeli Occupation Forces. And so they're objecting on it on those grounds, and also on the grounds that the New Zealand police are seemingly heading towards being more weaponized and working more with these companies that provide the IDF. So great work from Peace Action Aotearoa. We have you have our full support in your endeavours. And 2 people who climbed the roof were arrested. So do check out their pages and see if there's any way you can support that going forward.
Kapai.
Kapai. So this was an interesting thing that just caught my eye today.
Oh, apologies for the typo in animal.
Oh, Yeah.
Ingari, don't get distracted. We got this.
Ka pai. So Animal Justice Project, they did this survey in Britain about what people know about dairy. And what they found out is that people don't know the mere basics about the dairy industry. So here's some of their statistics. In Britain, 82% of people were unaware that cows are slaughtered at 5 to 7 years old. 83% of people were unaware that cows and calves are separated within 24 hours of birth. And 52 didn't even know that cows needed to be impregnated every year to create milk.
This is evidence that we need gender studies in our schools, to be honest. That mothers, I mean, this is just, that's quite wild. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, you know, I think we might, I'd love to have a survey like that in New Zealand and see where people are at. But when you do talk to people and you tell them, for example, farmers have to stick their arms up the backside of a cow and hold their pelvis so that they can impregnate them, cervix, so they can impregnate them, people don't believe you and they think that you're crazy when really you're just describing standard practice. And, you know, look, 17% of people think that companies provide consumers with enough information about how milk is made. So everyone agrees that we all deserve to be educated on how our products are made. I love animals as well.
And I don't know what the exact stat is for artificial insemination, which is the process that you're talking about, but it's standard practice. Like the majority of our dairy
Last
cows,
I checked, it was the majority.
like 70% or something like that. Such a unnatural. I mean, everything about the industry and agriculture in general is unnatural, but this one in particular, artificial insemination, which is used on the majority of cows in the herd, pretty wild.
So cool little survey. Thank you, Animal Justice Project. I think they're an Australian political party.
Yes.
And we have a New Zealand arm now as well. That's slowly growing. Ka pai. This article from Rob Campbell, who used to be the chair, I think is the word. He used to be the chair of Health NZ. And has worked in government positions for a long time. He released, and was one of the first people to resign as a result of this government's agenda.
Wow.
Yeah, if you remember back then. So he wrote this article that I think hits the nail on the head. It says, the real agenda behind the government's economic moves. I'm just going to read a little part of it because I think it's good. So he says this economic management approach may be summarized as to effect a series of shifts from 1, public to private investment and delivery. And I'm going to be talking a lot about that today. 2, an emergent bicultural back to a colonial nation.
I'll be talking about that one, that's for sure.
3, universal user charges. 4, regulated to market use of resources. So that's removing regulations, protection of our environment, and so on. And finally, limits on to incentives for private investment returns. And he says these politicians are not so much fiscal conservatives, we have had those before, as structural activists. We should not get caught up on the numbers. They pretend they are the goal, but they're not the real game. And in the article, he talks about, ignore that they're saying things about growth. Ignore that they're saying things about we want to cut costs. Look at what they're actually doing and not what they're saying. And what they're actually doing is restructuring our government radically. And it has nothing to do with those goals. And this was interesting. He says other parties get drawn into this framing, such as when all but Te Pāti Māori approved legislation supporting congestion charging. Te Pāti Māori rightly observed how regressive such programs are. Others appear to support individualizing responsibility for the times people travel and charging fees which are trivial to the rich and forbidding to the poor. This shift is intensified piece by piece. So massive win to Te Pāti Māori. This happened this week in Parliament, and all the political parties, except for Te Pāti Māori, supported this. So what is this congestion charging? It's the idea that you get charged during specific times of the day that are prone to congestion, in an effort to de-incentivize people from driving during those times. And, you know, Julianne Genter did acknowledge that we need to do systemic shifts in order to change congestion, whether it's public transport that she advocates for all the time, or ability to, you know, cycle lanes and things like that. But they still provided their support for this bill. And Labour was Arena Williams spoke on behalf of this bill. You know, she said in my area, which is Manurewa, we have people who have to wait 2 hours to get to work in Auckland City. This is not good. We have to do something about congestion, so we're going to support this bill. The problem is a lot of those people will now have to pay these new congestion charges, these poor people that I'm sure Labour is trying to advocate for, maybe. And certainly the Greens, I believe their intentions are good. What's going to end up happen is that people who have no choice but to drive during those hours, because they are going to work, as she said, will bear that larger cost, when instead that cost should be put on, for example, the government to make systemic shifts and, you know, millionaires and billionaires in the forms of taxes and other returns on their investments, like Rob Campbell was just talking about.
There's been in the past, right, cuts for public services, buses and public transport and stuff like that. It seems like a much smarter thing to put funding into that place to ease the congestion. You know, we can then because we can pay for that through just general taxes instead of making these individuals have to essentially pay a toll during that time. So it's like how we didn't want destinies to be added to the gang patch list, because that's going to punish the individuals rather than Brian Tamaki and other Destiny's head honchos. So yeah, I mean, yeah, it doesn't make sense to be putting this on the individuals.
And, you know, it's interesting that you mentioned that about defunding public transport, because that will increase people driving, which will increase congestion, which will increase congestion charges. So for the ability for them to capture that money, and potentially through a private corporation as well. And they've signaled that they want to increase toll roading and bring in private companies to do toll roading. So it's just another way to funnel our money from just everyday working people into the hands of corporations. And I'm very disappointed that the Greens supported this. And good points from Rob Campbell. He goes on to say the same is happening with private infrastructure investment as other parties are drawn into the web of systemic shifts in some imagined search for longer term unanimity. And here I think he's talking about the proposal to extend the terms to 4 years, which he thinks is a complete distraction, doesn't fix from the issues that we're dealing with. He goes on, all the major initiatives fit into this framework. Just think your way through what's being done to health services, who's gaining and who's losing. And it's true. I think, you know, the bullet points he provided, pretty much every government policy you can think of fits within that narrative. And yeah, that's all I've got for our quick fire political news.
Very good, very good. There's always so much more news that we want to cover.
Yeah.
But it's just constant, eh? The amount of news that comes through, it's really constant. Like, we try to have our things finished by Thursday, but then we watch the news on Thursday, and then there's like, you watch the news on Friday morning. And yeah, so we like to try and cover as much stuff as we can, but yeah, we can't get to all of it, that's for sure.
We like our deep dives as well, eh?
Yeah, absolutely.
I wanted to talk a little bit about the citizens arrest proposal that they're putting forward.
Oh, yeah.
But, you know, everyone's coming out against that. So they don't really need us, I guess.
Right.
You know, they've got, even the police has come out against it. But this government, you know, the way that they justified it was in the same exact argument that they justified the boot camps, which is basically, we know that there's no evidence at all to support what we want to do, but we're going to do it anyway because we're just trying things. We're going to try things. We want to try things. We want to do things that are different. That's their argument, which is really quite stupid. We do have evidence to say what they want to do will not work, just like we have the evidence for the boot camps. But this is an anti-evidence government.
Anti-evidence government. Yes, kapai. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about, people would have heard that there are all sorts of changes happening to the New Zealand school curriculum. The thing that I'm most interested in is the introduction of New Zealand history to the school curriculum. And prior to Labour making that announcement about history being introduced into the school curriculum, New Zealand history specifically, there was only a very small thing about Te Tiriti in like level 10 social sciences or something like that. But we'll get more into that. So today I'm talking about Elizabeth Rata, mainly, the New Zealand school curriculum and white supremacy. Essentially, this is just a story about white supremacy. I mean, you know, everything we talk about is about colonization. But this is a great little clear case of some of these old school academics who see the new world dawning, and they see their positions of privilege and status, which I think is one of the main parts of it, at risk, being challenged. You know, for academics in these spaces, for things like Mātauranga Māori to be emerging and these other things from indigenous value systems now taking some form of prominence, those are groups that they have to compete against for things like funding, for all sorts of things. But mainly it's that their whole worldview is being challenged, right? If you believe colonization is a good thing, then that's a very deep-seated aspect of white supremacy within yourself to think that colonization has been a good thing. But anyway, Elizabeth Rata. Those of you who have watched our previous episodes would have seen us talk about the Free Speech Union. Elizabeth Rata is also a member of the Free Speech Union. She has a special arm of the Free Speech Union that she manages in terms of university policy. And she has some vague connections to the origins of kura kaupapa. I wasn't able to tease out those exact connections, and other people have noticed that her history and involvement with kura kaupapa seems to be erased from the history books, which is interesting, because she uses her history with kura kaupapa to talk on Māori issues. And you'll also notice that her name is Elizabeth Rata. My understanding is that she had a Māori husband and she decided to keep that last name. But you'll see all the time in articles, news articles, academic articles, Rata. You know, it's written by Rata. And rarely is it questioned if she actually has any whakapapa Māori. And interestingly, she's the type of person to advocate against those types of lived experience things. She advocates for expertise in a subject over things like lived experience. So, you know, she's the perfect example of a Pākehā who thinks she can talk on Māori issues. Quietly, she's in the background doing a lot of things to the New Zealand curriculum at the moment. She is a lecturer at Auckland University. She does have a history in academia, in working for all things curriculum. I'm not saying that she's not an expert in her space, but I am saying she's a white supremacist working in her space. And often these experts, you know, they have a lot of academic intellect, but it doesn't change the fact that their perspectives are racist. And when I say white supremacy, you know, I'm not necessarily calling her a Nazi. Damn, don't want to get blocked on YouTube. I'm not necessarily calling her a Klan member and saying that she wears a hood and she attends Klan meetings and crucifies and burns people alive. You know, racism and white supremacy in our day has taken a new form, a new shape. You know, if white supremacy were that overt nowadays, it wouldn't survive, right? You know, if people wore their racism on their sleeves, like if everyone was a Craig Jepson or something like that, they wouldn't get very far. Well, Craig Jepson's kind of gotten far, right? He's the mayor of Kaipara, but that's right. Of course, he ran off of a racist campaign. Anyway, we're not going to get into him, but I do believe that if these individuals were to wear their intentions on their sleeves, then people would see through it. So let's get into it. Elizabeth Rata. Here she is giving a speech for the ACT Party. She's very much entwined in that whole group. She's not just a member of the Free Speech Union. You know, she does speeches for ACT, all sorts of things.
So I think
in terms of her white supremacy.
So I think
we can preserve the means of error.
Sorry.
Correct.
So I think the most.
Still learning how to do presentation through.
So I think the most.
Shush, Elizabeth. Okay, come on. This is an interview that she did recently with international fellow. He's going around the world doing interviews with people who share his opinion. And some of the things that she said in this interview, I thought would be good to pull up, just to show some examples of her white supremacy. Okay, just to tease that thinking out a little bit. I'll bring both of us up here because I think we'll both have something to say here. So we're going to tease out her white supremacy a bit. I know some people will think, well, that's a big claim, right, to call someone a white supremacist. So we're just going to explore that a little bit and talk through it. I will talk about how she's been impacting the curriculum soon. But first, just to give y'all a bit of a taste, and so you know I'm not talking out of my ass, let's have a look at what she said to Peter in this interview.
The most important thing upon which modernity is based is the concept of the individual who has authority over him or herself. Yeah, I think that's what modernity is. And you know, in previous periods of modernity, for example, ancient Greece, there was a movement towards individualism. When you see modernity being squeezed, then you see a movement towards the communal.
Yeah.
So the individual is absolutely important. The power, the authority. I mean, you think of the word authority, author. I am the author of my own destiny.
Oh, how clever.
And especially for groups who have traditionally never been allowed any authority. For example, women. I mean, for women to be the author of their own destiny. And this is modernity, and it's very recent, and it's very fragile.
You know what's fragile? Colonization.
Well, that's
the colonial trance is really what is fragile. So, you know, what's she talking about? She's talking about modernity. And I think what she's talking about in terms of modernity, she's talking about like an ideal living in this current day and age. Yeah. And you'll notice she's very focused on the individual. She promotes individualism rather than collectivism. And of course, you know, neoliberal policies, the neoliberal worldview is about prioritizing the individual. And it's very much from, you can understand her mindset in terms of, she doesn't necessarily think that you need to consult with individuals with lived experience if you can just have an individual there who has the expert opinion, which from her perspective would be able to trump the collective thoughts of people with lived experience.
Which she explicitly says in this interview as well.
And you'll just notice at the end of what she said, I'll just replay it.
Yeah, that was interesting.
Think of the word authority, author. I am the author of my own destiny. And especially for groups who have traditionally never been allowed any authority.
So she branches out here and she says women, for example. And this is aligned with her thinking that Indigenous peoples are savages, essentially. She's saying, you know, prior, Indigenous peoples have never had this kind of individual right because they're all ruled by the top-down authoritative rangatira, she would say, when of course that's not the case at all. She misrepresents realities and she twists them. She creates a straw man argument, something that's easier to take down than the actual thing. But we'll talk more about that later. But when she talks about groups who have not experienced modernity, individual rights and things like that, she brings up women. And now I'm not an expert on colonization and in terms of sexism and, you know, how colonization has imported a more sexist view, a patriarchal view. But from a lot of people that I've talked to, say gender diverse people, gender fluid people, they've always told me that they're okay being called a wahine. in terms of Te Ao Māori. From a Māori perspective, like when they're on, when these people are on the marae, for example, or in a Māori space, often I find that they're comfortable being referred to as a wahine, as kōtiro, as a woman from a Te Ao Māori perspective. And I'm not saying that this is everybody. Probably a few gender diverse people saying, hey, don't speak on behalf of me, so I apologize. But it has been my experience that people are comfortable being perceived from that feminine perspective from Te Ao Māori, through the Te Ao Māori lens. But when we look at it from a colonial worldview, a Pākehā-centric, Eurocentric worldview, that's when the toxic masculinity and toxic femininity comes into play, where people are wanting to distance themselves from those gender norms that are associated with the importation of these Western ideologies. And, you know, often people talk about women's suffragette and Pākehā women, New Zealand women being the first women getting the right to vote. Forgetting that in Māori societies, not only were our wahine rangatira, like on my Ngāti Porou side, Porou is a wahine, women held very high positions and women signed Te Tiriti o Waitangi. And so in this instant, she is framing things with that Western colonial worldview that sexism exists, and then applying it to Te Ao Māori. And I'm kind of jumping ahead of myself. There are other academics that I'm going to highlight who explain this better than I do.
If we can just, can we just play this?
Yeah,
and especially for groups who have traditionally never been allowed any authority, for example, women. I mean, for women to be the author of their own destiny, and this is modernity, and it's very recent, and it's very fragile.
Her saying it's very recent, right? Oh, I can do that. All good. You say your point.
Oh.
So I think
modernity, I guess she just means colonization, the colonial world that has imposed
that
itself
brings all of these amazing things,
the entire planet, has brought this amazing idea that women can have authority over their own lives, but completely twisting reality. And as you noted, Māori women did have authority in pre-colonial society. Researchers all say that Māori men and women had a fairly egalitarian society. So they may have had gender roles, but both were seen as equal. Both were capable of having high positions of authority. And it was actually colonization that came here and inflicted a sexist perspective and a patriarchal worldview. And I think this is encapsulated in that story that Matua Moana Jackson tells about his hapu had sent a woman to sign Te Tiriti o Waitangi. And it was the colonizers that refused. The colonizers said you can only send a man to sign Te Tiriti o Waitangi. So Moana's hapu decided not to sign based on that. So clearly the colonizers are the ones who brought these ideas, but in her mind, colonizers are the ones that liberated women, and everyone pre-colonial society oppressed women. And that's one of the common colonial tropes, and it's still being used to colonize countries around the world today, saying that they oppress their women, so we need to kill them all.
Kapai. All right, next Elizabeth clip coming at you. Brace yourselves, e te iwi.
We can preserve the means of error correction.
So I think the most...
Man, this is such a mess. Oh, no, we cover that next. That's okay.
We can preserve the means of error correction.
Yeah.
And I've never really understood why people think it's such a good thing to be a stagnant society that's been around hundreds of years, 1,000 or X number of years, a society that didn't even have dental care. Like, I've never understood why that's something that's considered to be a virtue. And any criticism of that idea, this society, this tribal society lasted X amount of time. I mean, nobody goes into those societies thinking, oh, like, I wonder what kind of advances in geochemistry they have. I wonder kind of advances in mathematics. No, they're quite the contrary. They think, oh, I wonder what the life expectancy is, or I wonder what
We did that.
whatever metrics. And I just can't fathom why anybody would think that's a good thing. Like, who in their right mind wants to live immiserated for thousands of years? Like, I just don't understand. Like, or is it that I'm completely wrong and, you know, either it's the myth of the noble savage, or they've not even thought about it, or it's a kind of radical cultural egalitarianism and all cultures are the same?
I think what is happening is the romanticization of the past.
Totally.
Yeah, it's sort of some seductive story about Acadia.
about colonization.
It's not the reality of a society without the wheel, with cannibalism, with warfare. No, it's not.
But I don't get that, because all you would need to do is just think of literally 5 minutes in your life when you've had insufferable dental pain. Like, that's literally all you would have to do to destroy the whole argument that a static society is a good society. Or am I missing something?
No, it's very difficult to understand, isn't it? How people can romanticize something which is profoundly not romantic.
Where to start? They talk about how people are romanticizing the past, and they shouldn't be doing that. But that's exactly what these people are doing with colonization. And I know that this clip was mostly the other guy talking, but of course, Elizabeth agreed with him and essentially doubles down. And in terms of the things that she brought up, that, colonization apparently saves us from, things like cannibalism and warfare, those are two things that the British and other Westerners were engaging in during that time themselves. And of course, they're the biggest warmongers on the planet.
Absolutely. And, it doesn't get talked about enough, but there is a disgusting history of cannibalism, of course, among the British and other European colonizers, including cannibalism of the people they enslaved, the people they colonized, and of course just warfare and torture and horrors they inflicted on the majority of the planet. So whatever Māori did here in Aotearoa among each other can't be compared to colonizers going around and slaughtering hundreds of millions of people and stealing the land world over and then controlling their resources, until this day. So for her to view Māori as being savage and warlike while romanticizing the colonizer, it's for me, it's clear projection. Again, I'm always going on about how colonizers project, and she's projecting her own romanticization of colonization and projecting her own inability to look at the harms and the ugliness of colonization. And then, with the dentistry example.
It's funny, people are laughing about that in the comments. I'm like, don't look at my teeth. Don't look at my teeth, because dental health, it's a huge issue in Aotearoa. And sorry to interrupt you, but Māori, there were studies done in the past looking at cavities, for example, and Māori had no cavities back in the day. Of course, we didn't have things like refined flours and sugars and things like that. We had a mostly whole foods diet. And so and he brought up life expectancy as well. People who are familiar with our content would have seen the reel that we put out the other day. John Robinson, during oral submissions for the Treaty Principles Bill, brought up life expectancies, and the manipulator decided to use a really bad baseline in terms of what Māori life expectancy was back in those times. Prior to colonization, it's understood and recorded in the journals of settlers and colonizers who came here at the time that Māori had a comparable life expectancy to the settlers and colonizers of that time, before colonization. So it wasn't until colonization that our health started to deteriorate. Sorry to interrupt.
No, kapai, that's what I was going to talk about. So if he just could go into his brain and think for literally 5 minutes and ask Google to compare the dental health of Māori and the colonizers during that same time, because that's how comparisons work. And if he was to compare life expectancy of Māori and the colonizers at the same time, it would have destroyed his entire argument. And then for them to present this as an example of why the culture is inferior, because I don't know if you caught it, but he explicitly said, we've got this issue of people, being extremely relative and arguing that all cultures are equal. What he's saying is that all cultures are not equal, that colonial Western culture is superior, and that was all their arguments for why that is. And of course, we ticked all of those things off. The only thing that's left is a wheel, which my people invented. So please keep that out of your mouth, white people. Thank you very much. Don't use it to score points against our fellow Indigenous people.
Hilarious. Here we go. The story about the wheel again. We all know the Iraqis invented the wheel. Come on, you can stop rubbing it in our faces. Center of civilization, Iraq.
It's
okay.
not my fault. Hey, she brought it up.
And he says the other thing. He's never seen, what's all the rage when it comes to a static civilization who's simply existed for a long time. It doesn't take a rocket scientist or a climate scientist to understand that the human trajectory that we're on is like on a urgent crash course to self-destruction.
Yeah.
Because of all the things brought by colonization, we're in the worst place that we've ever been in terms of our mutual relationship with Papatuanuku, with Mother Earth, the consumerism, the deforestation, the water pollution. It's not Indigenous cultures that are causing that harm. I think, these are the types of people who, they're pushing neoliberal reform. They want the free market to drive things. Like these guys want 2 private schools to compete against each other, for them to each have, to be a really expensive school, but they're pursuing the highest possible academic achievement. And, maybe the university graduates of those schools will one day go on to invent, the next nuclear bomb, or something great like that, Those are the types of things these people are pursuing. Never before thought of magical, like genetic engineering and stuff like that. Those are the scientific and academic pursuits that they want, instead of analyzing our sustainability techniques of, our prior lives to understand sustainability from that perspective. No.
Yeah, and on that point with the stagnant, honestly, these guys tick like every box of, how to speak like a colonizer.
Yeah.
Because decolonial writers often talk about how colonizers have this perspective of Indigenous cultures as stagnant and as stuck in time. And that's why they're actually struggling with the progress that Te Ao Māori is making. They're struggling with Māori becoming activists in lots of spaces, and they're constantly trying to put them back in a box. No, Māori believe this. No, Māori think like this, and because they actually, in their minds, they've put Māori in a box, and they struggle to even see a Māori outside of that. That's why, and you'll see, I think, one of the clips, she thinks anyone who doesn't fit into her idea of what Māori is must be an elite Māori who's trying to manipulate everyone for their way. But yeah, they have this idea of Indigenous cultures being stagnant and having done nothing until colonizers came there. Of course, it's not true. There's no such thing as a stagnant culture. All cultures progress in their own ways. And as Pere said, the current ways of progressing are actually destroying the livelihood of humanity. So who is more progressed? Is it the society that kills itself, or the society that was able to find, eventually, with time, a sustainable way to coexist with the environment?
Yeah, I mean, the closer you get to nature, the more sustainable you are. And Indigenous peoples are closer to nature than any other demographic. It's almost like, for me, the ultimate progression is to turn into a tree. You know what I mean? Like for me, that's my ultimate progression. If human beings could one day turn into trees.
He tries his best.
And just to live completely in alignment, in harmony with the natural world. But of course, they would see that as regression, as the ultimate regression, really. But yeah, okay, I think we've got one more. I don't think I've included the clip that you're referring to. So essentially, what Samah was referring to is that she doesn't think there's any good in terms of people encouraging Indigenous ideas. She thinks it's just because they're becoming well off around sharing these ideas, that there is no inherent benefit to indigeneity or Indigenous thinking. It's now just created a new, like, you know, cottage industry, as Luxon would call it.
And it's interesting because it also mirrors the narratives we've heard from David Seymour. He said, you know, I haven't seen a single good argument against the Treaty Principles Bill. And again, these guys in this interview repeatedly say, there's just not a single argument for why these people are pushing Indigenous culture. They dismiss it completely.
Yeah.
And all of us are apparently just brainwashed by these elite Māori to think ideas that make no rational sense whatsoever.
Okay. There's so many things I want to say to that, but I think I've included it in the presentation, so we better just go along with it.
Two more questions. Are you were you born in New Zealand?
Oh, yes. Yes, I'm a New Zealander going way back.
Because your accent seems like it's received pronunciation.
I don't know how that happened.
Is there...
So I hope you caught that. He's just asking if she's from New Zealand because he's weirded out by her accent. And what he says is he's hearing from her what he's calling received pronunciation, and I had to Google that one. Apparently it's the dialect or the accent that the Queen spoke, or that the royal family spoke, and it's also the English that English colonizers would use to teach other nations. So after the English would colonize a nation, English in received pronunciation was the language that they used to teach. So it's like the ultimate colonizer language. It's the ultimate colonial language. And of course, why has Rata taken on this colonial accent? It's because they emulate the British. They emulate colonial āhuatanga. They emulate aspects of the colonizer. And when I think about my father and his sisters, I think that they used to speak with a little bit of a British accent. They all went to boarding schools. And myself, when I was younger, because all of the cousins down the road used to bully me, I never liked speaking with a normal kind of what I thought was an authentic accent when I was a kid. So I kind of taught myself to speak in like a bit of an English or American accent, and I think I still kind of have it today a little bit. But you know, it's just that idea of trying to get as far away as possible from indigeneity, from, you know, what's on the ground. And you know, it's that posh kind of thing, trying to elevate yourself in that way. And a lot of Māori did that because there was that huge push, of course, for us to push our own tikanga to the side. You know, like a lot of some of my whānau believed that that we had to assimilate. You know, it's all part of assimilation. Us losing those natural aspects of ourselves to appease the colonial system, which is being forced on us, which is a very, very sad thing. But I think we're turning the corner now. No thanks to people like Elizabeth Rata. Oh, and by the way, that interview was called Ditching Equity and Reclaiming Our Schools. Oh boy. Reclaiming our schools from the savages. It may as well have said that, right? Who want
equity.
Yeah. And I just thought I'd bring up this. This is from Leonie Pihama. She is a huge advocate of Kaupapa Māori, and she really breaks down Rata really well. I recommend people go on Leonie's website, kaupapamaori.com, or search Leonie Pihama Elizabeth Rata. So she says, Rata claims her work is critical scholarship and labels Māori educational developments using terms such as ethnic fundamentalism, secular religion, and politicized ethnicity. As such, Rata frames a context to deny Māori identity and cultural positioning as Indigenous peoples by applying limited and reductionist Western frameworks of identity, so like the racialization that white supremacy puts on others, right? Which has no applicability to Māori cultural ways of positioning ourselves. And, you know, so what she does, you know, it's kind of like what I was saying before. She talks about all of these Western I mean, I think it's a great way of putting it here by Leonie. I can't do it better myself. She's talking about how she hides behind all of this academic speech. And actually, when you break it down, these are things that really don't apply to Māori. They don't reflect reality at all. But we have these understandings of these things through criticizing, actually, you know, the Western system. And she's applying that onto Māori when it's just not reality at all. Leonie continues to say, what is most evident is that the arguments posed by Rata serve the interests of Pākehā academics, such as herself. The labels created and imposed by Rata not only have no relationship to Māori cultural frameworks, but they have been constructed to undermine any Indigenous attempts to create and sustain Kaupapa Māori contexts that work for our children. And it's I'll just note as well, like, these attacks by Elizabeth Rata have been going on for a long time. Like, Leonie mentions that Rata has been like this for like 20 years. And Leonie has resisted talking about Elizabeth, but because she's just so, because she's causing so much trouble, I think it is important that we call these things out. And so in the context that Leonie was talking about here, Elizabeth was criticizing Kura Kaupapa. Kura Kaupapa, which is Māori Immersion School, which is led by Mātauranga Māori. Or it has Mātauranga Māori there. And some people might forget, or you might not know, Elizabeth Rata is one of the 7 who signed that infamous letter from the University of Auckland that claimed Mātauranga Māori is not science. So, you know, not only is she chipping away at the curriculum in all sorts of institutions, she's trying to mute, dull down, suppress Indigenous thinking across the board. I was able to pull up a 2012 thesis from Rebecca Wirihana, and she shared some kōrero from Beryl Woodford Roa, who describes Rata as such. The Māoris hate her because she's kind of the spokesperson for the right. Rodney Hyde and all that lot can base a lot of their stuff on her writings. She's kind of given them the academic ideology.
I mean, colonization always has that academic arm.
Yeah, so we talk about all of the different arms of these neoliberal groups, right? Taxpayers Union, Free Speech Union, the ACT Party, and then you've got Curia Market Research, you know, who is their polling, marketing, statistics arm. And now we're seeing Elizabeth Rata. She makes up one of the individuals from their more academic arm. And, you know, talking about Rodney Hyde, you know, it was never really, it's never been said who it was who informed their old iteration of the Treaty Principles Bill back in 2005. Who knows? Haven't got any evidence to say that it was Elizabeth, but knowing that she has had that kind of ideological, that she's contributed to the ideological foundations of the ACT Party, who knows? Maybe there's a connection there. Elizabeth also gave a submission in support of the Treaty Principles Bill recently. And even from this, which is a recent, you know, very recent, right? Even from this, I think there's enough to know that she is the wrong person to have looking after our school curriculum. I'm not going to play the video. I've just got the text from it so that we can break it down a little bit more. But this is literally the first thing that she said. The first thing that she opened her submission with. What is the best title given to any New Zealand legislation? My money is on the 1877 Education Act, an act to make further provision for the education of the people of New Zealand. The people of New Zealand. So as early as the 1870s, there's that commitment to a united people who belong to and benefit from the nation New Zealand. Nearly 150 years later, that commitment is under serious threat from those who would replace liberal democracy with tribal sovereignty, and by doing so create a racialized society. Apartheid.
All right, Julian, chill out.
And I just think it's an interesting thing that she's focusing on the wording of this act and praising the wording of this act instead of, looking at the reality of what was happening during the 1870s, which is when Māori were going through probably the biggest period of land confiscation after the New Zealand Wars. The biggest period of land confiscation is the time that she likes to look to in terms of being an example of liberal democracy, or something that was said during those times to say that that's the direction that we're heading, liberal democracy. And she says that, nearly 150 years later, that commitment is under serious threat. Still just looking at the commitment, right? But she doesn't actually provide any evidence at all to prove or to say that that commitment that was made in that wording has actually benefited us at all or led to anything. I just think it's a little bit, it's just ridiculous. And of course, what was happening during that time, right? So during that time, we had the native schools. And so from Te Ara, from the outset, the priority of the schools was the teaching of English. The plan was to phase out the native schools once English had taken hold in a community. Initially, the Māori language was allowed to facilitate English instruction, but as time went on, official attitudes hardened against any use of Māori language. In later years, many Māori children were punished for speaking their first language at school.
So this is the golden age, according to Elizabeth Rata.
In terms of intentions, right? But yes, exactly. But she's so sneaky with her language like that, talking about the lovely intentions that was in legislation in the 1870s while hiding or omitting this very violent assimilative truth of colonization, assimilating Māori, suppressing our tikanga, our customs, our reo, to assimilate us into what they would say is a superior English colonial system. But of course, like I said, during this time, going through the biggest phase of land loss for Māori, the biggest periods of poverty for Māori was during this time. And now we know through endless amounts of research that the more you separate Indigenous peoples from their culture, the worse off they are. So during this time, not only were we losing our land and everything, but we were doing the worst possible thing in terms of a colonial perspective to diminish the oranga, the health of Te iwi Māori.
It really shows her intention with the direction she wants New Zealand education to go toward, which is to go back to just strictly assimilation into the colonial worldview.
And now still on Te Ara, I thought this was interesting. It says that it wasn't until the 1930s where there was a signal that this hardline assimilation policy was changing. So before the 1930s, it was still understood that the hardline assimilation policy operating in native schools was still active, still a thing. So she brings up 1870 and talks about liberal democracy. 60 years. There's a 60-year gap in that time of hardline assimilation policy in these native schools. And so, she gives no evidence of that time being reflective of a liberal democracy. She also doesn't say that, of course, during that time, Māori were locked out of voting, in our first elections, because during that time you had to own land under a single title instead of communally, which was the norms back in that day. But no, of course, the intention in the wording of colonial legislation, that's what we should look to. And now, a really awesome thing, this has been known for a while now, that Māori practicing their culture, attending kura kaupapa, learning via Māori ways of learning, Māori ways of thinking, mā tauranga Māori, that we thrive in those situations, that we thrive there. And now we have the evidence to prove it, which is an incredible thing. there was a report by NZQA. And in the report, it says 5% of Ākona Māori, that's Māori students, in year 11 and 13 were enrolled in Kaupapa Māori settings, okay, across 64 kura. Of these 57 kura, who cater to Ākona Māori, who face more socioeconomic barriers to attainment, okay, and we placed them in the lowest. Oh, sorry, I'm explaining this poorly. I will just read the whole thing so that I don't trip myself up, okay? In 2023, 5% of Ākona Māori in years 13 to 11 were enrolled in Kaupapa Māori settings across 64 kura. Of these, 57 kura catering to Ākona who face more socioeconomic barriers to attainment, placing them in the lowest of 3 socioeconomic groups. So it's looking at kura kaupapa students, and it's saying that they're in the lowest socioeconomic group in terms of this study. So it's separating out, I guess those on the really high end of the education spectrum. So we're looking at kids who are in kura kaupapa on the lower socioeconomic end of the spectrum, and comparing them with people in mainstream schools, in public schools, who come from that same socioeconomic background.
Okay.
And the results are amazing. So when measured next to schools within the socioeconomic group, 41% of Kaupapa Māori students attained university entrance, compared with 24% of all students from English medium schools.
Wow.
And 18% of Māori students from English medium schools.
Wow.
So, that's a 17% difference with general students, but a massive 23% difference when kura kaupapa Māori students are compared with Māori who are in public schools or English medium schools. It's a huge difference. And it really, for me, it puts the nail in the coffin in terms of how we can solve a lot of issues for our people, is for us to return to these ways of learning, and for the government to accept, and for people like Elizabeth Rata and all of her types who are informing the government towards these, assimilation policies and whatnot. I don't know what it's going to take to convince these people, but for me, this is a clear example that if you are Māori in particular, but not only if you are Māori, because kura kaupapa is not just for Māori,
It's for everyone, eh?
and that's a point that I think I'll just let this next video play. Here is Takuta Ferris asking the heads of kura kaupapa a question. I'll just play it. It's a great little one. This was from when they were giving their submission against the Treaty Principles Bill.
Question to you, and for the benefit of many of my panel members who are probably not well aware of the efforts and outcomes of kura kaupapa, is given that the highest NCEA results in the country last year were achieved by a kura kaupapa, and many other kura kaupapa in the top quartile, and given also that kura kaupapa, kohanga reo, and whare wānanga, all education initiatives, were founded as acts of determination in the late 70s, early 90s. So they are literally the embodiment of Māori stepping into rangatiratanga and owning it. And we now know what that produces. So in light of that, what do you think this bill threatens in terms of our modern day reclamation of rangatiratanga?
The kohanga reo, kura kaupapa Māori and the wānanga we refer to them as sites of resistance. Resistance to what? Resistance to everything bad that colonization and colonialization has inflicted upon us as a people. We describe colonization as the stealth of the stealth of the land, and we describe colonialization as the messing with the Māori mind and the Māori well-being. Now, this bill could threaten our existence. we are under no illusions about that, because if it proceeds, the next thing will be an attack on the supposed divisiveness of Māori initiatives by Māori for Māori, rather than celebrating, because not everybody who attends Kohanga Reo and not everybody who attends Kura Kaupapa Māori or the Wānanga are Māori, and people of all races. So rather than seeing them as unifying options, this person, Mr. Seymour, and his cohorts would tend to look
Elizabeth.
at them as being separatist and divisive. They are not.
Kia
This
ora.
bill, should it proceed, would threaten their existence, our existence.
Kia ora.
So, Māori and non-Māori students perform best at kura kaupapa. That absolutely destroys these racist arguments against things like kura kaupapa. How do they come back from that?
I don't know. I'd love. They'd probably come at us with some academic jargon and stuff. You know what I mean? But, yeah, you know, and just going back to the previous one, you know, when you think about how Māori students, the current colonial schooling system is failing them, is really failing them. And, you know, what he says is next people are going to be turning to things like kura kaupapa and attacking things like kura kaupapa. These are the statistics. This is the situation that those people are happy for us to be pushed into. Even though it's clear we have evidence that our students are doing better in kura kaupapa, I feel they are still going to be convinced that they would prefer to see us in that 18% bracket.
Well, they want Māori to be an underclass so that they can hyper-exploit that underclass and force them to take jobs that are not secure, that are underpaid, that have bad conditions. So I think they benefit from Māori remaining in that lower socioeconomic class and even below everyone else.
Yeah.
And that's why they want to shut things down like this and like the Māori Health Authority. Because the same thing we would have seen with the Māori Health Authority if they had given it time, is we would have seen better statistics coming out of it.
Definitely. And, you know, but what you just said, the colonial capitalist system requiring an underclass, that's the kind of white supremacist stuff that they don't wear on their sleeves, right? But that is really the core of things. Those are the things they never will bring up. You know, when I was talking about, you know, two private schools fighting it out against each other to try and create that top academic type of position, you know, who's going to be the janitors, right? Who's going to be operating in the cafeteria, right? All of those things. They still need those things. And so that's why they do need an underclass to exist. Of course, all of those things are going to be replaced by AI in the very near future, but until we get there, they need slaves. Okay, now I paraphrased a bit from her oral submission that she gave, but yeah, just here's some things that I thought was interesting. Consider the two words liberal, democracy, and their connection. Both give us something that none of our ancestors living in kinship groups had. First world nations need liberal democracy's creative tension. The creative tension, you know, you need to be in that 18% bracket so that you can suffer and grow, you know. The very existence of the bill, she's talking about the Treaty Principles Bill, the very existence of the bill is liberal democracy in action. And of course, you know, you just heard from Matua in the previous video saying that, you know, the bill, you know, they have very contrasting views. He's talking about the bill and its success leading to our extinguishment, our, extinction. And then, of course, on the other side of the coin, you've got Rata saying that the loss of the bill would be the loss of liberal democracy. Shows the difference in the two worlds. But I think her point about how first world nations need liberal democracy's creative tension, that's probably one of the uglier quotes. It goes back as well to what that guy was saying, you know, about static civilizations and how he doesn't see, you know, they're not in pain, so they're not growing. But of course, you know, this creative tension that they're talking about colonization. They're talking about colonization. They're saying that first world nations need colonization. In terms of a white supremacist point of view, doesn't get more white supremacy than that. So, moving to the kaupapa now, I guess. Labour decided that they are going to introduce compulsory New Zealand history into schools, which was a huge announcement. I remember when this happened, Labour was making all sorts of announcements for Māori. And this one I was really happy about, because I thought this is one that actually has to do with educating people about te tiriti o Waitangi. And a lot of the things that have been happening, you know, like the Treaty Principles Bill and the arrogance, the ignorance, the racism that does exist here in Aotearoa, the misunderstandings, the propaganda around te tiriti o Waitangi, all of that has been made possible because of our government's inaction around creating and providing te tiriti education. They created that void. You know, the government should have been teaching us all about te tiriti a long, long time ago. All of our people should have been learning about it since the signing of te tiriti. But of course, honoring the actual text of te tiriti has never suited the government. It never has. So our ignorance around te tiriti, the government has been riding that ignorance for a very, very, very long time. But thanks to, of course, a lot of our activists and incredible advocates in the space of te tiriti justice, our society is evolving, and we're progressing to a more just society. No thanks to the government. But they did make this announcement, which I was, you know, I was impressed. I was impressed by this announcement. But of course, now it's being rolled back.
These wars.
So the Treaty of Waitangi.
These wars.
We got to get rid of that autoplay, man. So this is Vincent O'Malley. He's a historian who had
these wars.
I'm just going to hold it right there. He had a lot to do with the creation of the history curriculum that is currently there. So a big mihi up to you, Vincent, for your mahi. Here's him being interviewed on The Breakfast Show, and he just gives a little bit of a kōrero about the situation, which I think was just before Labour made the announcements. So maybe he was working on the curriculum during that time, not sure.
These wars had a profound influence on the course of New Zealand history. In some respects, I'd argue that they were more important than World War I and World War II in terms of the impacts that they had. And that's not widely known and not widely appreciated. And at the moment, in our school system, we've got what's known as a high autonomy curriculum, which basically means that individual schools and teachers get to decide what they teach. So there's no requirement to teach anything about the New Zealand Wars at all. Our kids can leave school without any knowledge of this topic. The only New Zealand history that's in the curriculum is in Year 10 in Social Studies. That's something about the Treaty of Waitangi needs to be taught, and that's it.
So what he says is that there is a high autonomy something, rather, that our schools follow, which gives them the ability to choose what they teach. So yes, we teach history, but, you know, I was homeschooled, so I don't actually know what they teach in history classes, but I assume people are learning about what? Like the French.
World history.
But what he said in this interview is that from his perspective, he would argue in some instances that World War I and World War II was less impactful than what they were calling at the time the Land Wars, later renamed to the New Zealand Wars, because it wasn't just about land, it was about all sorts of things. But yeah, he's saying that the Land Wars, which is not in our curriculum, is not compulsory taught, from his perspective, in some respects, was more impactful than World War I and World War II.
So the Treaty of Waitangi obviously was in the 1840s, and then these New Zealand Wars happened afterwards. Is that why it's important to know how they impacted on our country?
Absolutely. The story of the New Zealand Wars is really part of the story of the treaty, because the signing of the Treaty of Waitangi in 1840 didn't change everything overnight. There wasn't this dramatic transformation in the country. In most areas, Māori continued to manage their own affairs as they always had. And so really the New Zealand Wars are about a battle between two competing visions of what New Zealand was and what it could become. On the one hand, Māori ideas or expectations of partnership. On the other hand, the Crown and Pākehā came to New Zealand and thought that they would be in charge, and arrived and discovered that they weren't. And so the wars were about the Crown's attempt to impose its authority over the country and to eliminate Māori rangatiratanga.
How do you think it will help us understand where we are now as a country?
I think understanding of the historical context is incredibly important in helping young people make sense of the world today. And one of the examples I cite is we can't really understand contemporary Māori polity without understanding the historical background to that, which is that the New Zealand Wars and the subsequent land confiscations of millions of acres of land condemned generations of Māori to lives of poverty. And that's something that, that resonates over many, many generations, and we need to understand that background. And the other important part of that story, which people don't widely appreciate, is before the 1860s, before the main period of the New Zealand Wars, Māori were the leading drivers of the New Zealand economy. Most of New Zealand's export income was being derived from Māori, and that is destroyed almost literally overnight during the course of these wars.
So he says a lot, right? Just in that interview, he talks about how Māori economic trade was big before colonization, that to understand modern day poverty for Māori, that we have to understand colonization, that we have to understand land confiscations and the generations of poverty that it created after that. There's something deeply satisfying about listening to a Pākehā historian that you agree with. So yeah, I just think Vincent is a he's done a lot of amazing work. If you've seen the forget what channel or what YouTube channel it is, but they do that Aotearoa history channel that's got the two people behind the desk, and they've got all the animations and stuff, and I'll have to link it somewhere, but it's some really awesome history lessons that I think he is responsible for being one of the main academics behind that. So incredible. And so that modernity that Elizabeth Rata is talking about, and all of the nice things that she believes the colonizers brought, they had to disrupt Māori's ways of being at the time for those things to be brought in. And like he said, in some of the instances of the New Zealand Wars, that happened overnight, the destruction of Māori societies. And then for this forced colonial system, this unfitting colonial system to be placed over the top of us. And without that knowledge, we can't understand poverty of today. So of course, it makes sense for the government to not be teaching us about that stuff. From the early days, we'll just continue on, otherwise we're going to take all night. But just a shout out to these students of Aotearoa College. Back in the day, before Labour made this announcement, they attended a Memorial Day, and I think it was Memorial Day for the massacre that happened at Rangiaowhia, or at least kōrero was shared about Rangiaowhia at this Memorial Day. And these students, learning about this history, they were inspired to do something about it. They lobbied the government for a Remembrance Day. And also one of the things that they wanted was for local histories to be taught in schools. And they got about 13,000 people to sign this petition. Incredible mahi from these rangatahi. They created a huge public conversation nationwide about the New Zealand Wars at the time. And then when Labour had their announcement that they're going to be teaching New Zealand history compulsory in schools, what did some of the political parties say at the time? Well, the ACT Party, their response, among other things, was that it is depressing. They were depressed at the idea of New Zealand history being compulsory in schools. Paul Goldsmith at the time, he criticised it. He didn't think there was enough balance. He was more interested in sharing, positive stories about our economy. He said, how did we make a living as a country? How in such a short space of time did we attain one of the highest living standards in the world?
By destroying Māori society.
Yeah.
That's what the curriculum is trying to tell people.
Yeah, but it's like, you know, I would love, Paul, for us to examine how we got our economy. Once we start analyzing where the wealth of Aotearoa has come from, the more you realize it's come from the dispossession of our land, the destruction of our culture, the repression of our peoples. You know, so I support Paul on this one. Let's look into where our economy has come from. Because when you do that, you will realize, as Vincent is saying, you know, there was the destruction of the Māori economy to make way for the colonial economy. You really can't learn about early day economics in Aotearoa without learning about colonization and that forced imposition of the colonial system over te iwi Māori. So not a bad suggestion from Paul. And then National comes into power. And in their coalition agreement with ACT, they talk about restoring balance to the Aotearoa New Zealand history's curriculum. Restoring balance. Okay? And Erica Stanford, amongst the 100-day plan for education, she announces a ministry advisory group to oversee the work that she's doing in terms of curriculum changes. And in that group, it's mostly New Zealand First Initiative members, and they're another thing to talk about another time. But amongst them is Elizabeth Rata, and as well, Melissa Derby, again, who is another member of she's a founding member of the Free Speech Union, Melissa Derby. You know, they're everywhere. They're literally everywhere. And similar to Goldsmith, Erica has this idea that, we should talk more about our positive, you know, the economic side of things. And the example that she brought up in this preview on the AM show was talking about the first refrigerated or frozen shipment of meat, which I think came out of Dunedin. And she's like, you know, that revolutionized agriculture in Aotearoa. And, you know, it's one of those examples of, it did revolutionize things. It supercharged the most extractive industry in this country, the most extractivist, polluting industry in this country. It cemented the colonial idea of turning Aotearoa into a farm for the rest of the world, to turn us into a food factory for the rest of the world, essentially. Again, you know, we cannot talk about our economic development in Aotearoa without talking about colonization and the erosion of Māori society to make way for these new extractivist, capitalist industries. And, you know, during that time, there was, you know, during the land confiscations, that was the time when Māori stopped working for themselves. You know, they started, instead of communally working in groups, collective groups, and you know, owning the modes of production, that's the period when they started switching to working for Pākehā, working for the government, having to pay tax, and all of those other things. So the destruction of our ways of being, our ways of life, to make way for this new colonial form of economy that concentrates our wealth into the upper echelons, while those on the lower end are they're just, you know, they're the lowest in the ranks. So
And if you can just quickly explain why refrigeration helped speed up the colonization of this country, and specifically the industry. What industry are you talking about, and how did it help them?
So animal agriculture, right? It was a meat shipment at the time. So, you know, what were the settlers and the colonizers doing here in Aotearoa? You know, they were taking land. What were they taking land for? Well, for whatever they wanted, but a huge driver was for animal agriculture. Of course, it requires a lot of land, animal agriculture. In terms of industries, it requires more land than any other industry, especially here in Aotearoa, because we have pasture-based systems. And, you know, we were doing short trips, I think, to Australia at the time, you know, with salted meats and whatever, things like that. But this was the first time refrigeration was being utilized. And so instead of sending products that then become rancid when it gets there and rotten by the time it gets there, because of refrigeration, we opened up our market to the rest of the world in terms of these, you know, awful products that create a lot of resources to produce, that pollute our environment. Now we've got more customers. We've got a bigger field to play on.
So it enabled them to expand, and they expanded really quickly. And it was that sort of thing where they needed the demand to justify the farms in order to steal land from Māori. And so the more demand they got, the more land they stole. And they all worked together. All of these things working together, the farming, the demand from around the world, and the need to change land from the hands of Māori into the colonial hands. All of those things work together, and all of those justifications were used. And refrigeration is always cited as one of those biggest drivers of this industry. And we can see what it's led to now. We've got over a half of our land being locked into these, you know, monocrop grasslands for animals that are predominantly shipped overseas. So we've continued with this model of refrigerating and shipping animal products. And she's saying we should talk about that story. Well, we should talk about that story, but it is in fact a story about colonization.
It's a story of land theft. And, you know, and a lot of our land that is locked away right now is locked away in animal agriculture. You know, all of us are fighting over these tiny parcels of land. Well, the farmers who stole our land in the first place, they still have it. And now it's in private property. And so it's gone, essentially. But, you know, just think about it. There is enough land for all of us. But if we maintain these efficient production methods of creating food, and animal agriculture is the least efficient form of food production in the world, especially dairy, which is our main thing here in Aotearoa. You know, these inefficiencies, you know, it takes all of our land, and it's so incredibly inefficient. In terms of how colonization is still impacting us from a land perspective, animal agriculture is the biggest player. And so if that's what she's talking about in terms of understanding that foundation of the modern day agricultural system, I'm happy for her to put that into the curriculum. But of course, they're not going to give that kind of context. They're just going to throw it out there as a kind of, hey, look at this great thing that we did because of colonization.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's unfortunately for these colonizers, white supremacists, you know, pick your word. Unfortunately for these colonizers, the story of New Zealand is inherently tied in with colonization because New Zealand is a settler colony. So everything, and I mean everything that New Zealand did in the time since settlers arrived here until today is the story of colonization. So what they want about in terms of, no, let's just focus on this. Let's just focus on economic development, the positive aspects. Well, that's impossible to divorce that from colonization. Every single one of those steps that they took was done at the expense of Māori. So what they're really saying is we want to go back to taking that context out of the story. We want to go back to telling stories about this country without giving the rest of its history, the other part, the massive part, to just continue erasing history, basically.
And if we learn about colonization, land theft, and how farmers still hold the majority of that land, you know, what a hit that would be for our people to be learning about that. You know, the farming lobby is very big. When it comes to learning about colonization and understanding te tiriti, the farmers have a lot to lose. Well, those who own farms, you know, the banks, not individual farmers, but, you know, Fonterra, all of these massive farming groups, they have a lot to lose if the psyche of us here in Aotearoa changes and understands that the foundations of their industry are incredibly violent. The colonial foundations of their industry is an incredibly violent story of oppression. It's not something that they want to be encouraging in the psyche of Kiwis. That's why I think the ACT Party said that it was depressing that New Zealand histories is going to be compulsory in our schools.
And that's why that Andrew Hoggard guy, who was from Federated Farmers, is now part of the ACT Party. There is this, and I won't go into it now, but there is a long history of Federated Farmers supporting anti-Māori policies if it benefits them and their agenda. And, you know, supporting horrific people that have attacked Māori. So now them being part of ACT is just part of that agenda that Pere's talking about, of wanting to maintain hold all over this private property that was stolen, first and foremost, and secondly, to be able to do anything they want on that private property. So if that means putting a whole bunch of nutrients on and it's going to go in the river and it's going to impact your Māori neighbour, they want the right to do that. And that's why the ACT Party is so hyper-focused on individualism and individual rights. And that's why Elizabeth Rata is so hyper-focused on individual rights, because they want to protect the individual rights of landowners over the collective rights of everyone else in this country.
Kia ora, kia ora, kia ora. Thank you for that bridge and that little wrap up. It's great. So here's now I'm going to dig into what some of the teachers are saying, okay, about these proposed curriculum changes. This is an article from Jessie Moss for the spin-off, and she says teachers don't want the new histories curriculum to be rebalanced, right? And she pulls up in this article, there was a survey done by the New Zealand Education Institute, which is the largest education sector union in Aotearoa, and they found through their member survey that 80% of educators don't want this curriculum rebalancing that they're talking about. Don't want it. And that's consistent against, like, I looked up pretty much all of the big teacher collectives that exist. This is from Te Ao Māori News. Teachers worried restoring balance to history curriculum may send Aotearoa backwards. And that's Bruce Jepson. He says, we started from a place of education being dominated by a Western Eurocentric view of knowledge and value. So all of the curriculum changes have happened to try and get balance. So rebalance, how it's framed in terms of the current political discourse, is to take us back to imbalance and to challenge the balance that we tried to create. And really, you know, there is no teacher collective organization that I found who supports these curriculum changes. This is Chris Abercrombie from the Post-Primary Teachers Association. What does balance mean? Have we had balance in our history teaching before? For the first time, Māori and Pacifica students are going to see themselves in the history that we teach, and we cannot lose that. And it's a great point as well. It's like we're not just learning about Māori history in this histories curriculum. We're also learning about the paternalistic colonial attitude that the New Zealand government has had over all of the our Pacific whanaunga. So a lot about Samoa is in the history curriculum. It talks about the mishandling of the influenza epidemic in 1918. The New Zealand paternalistic attitude at the time gravely mishandled that situation and led to a lot of people losing their lives. It covers the government apology in 2002 and talks about the annexations of the Cook Islands, Tokelau, Niue. And so, yeah, there are some amazing things that are in, you know, that are a part of our history. And there's so many things to learn about our colonial history, not just about Māori.
So on that note, just quickly as well, just a little side note that I just saw an article earlier today. New Zealand is saying that they're going to spy more on the Cook Islands because of their deal that they made with China. They actually said, we're going to spy on you more. So to show that it's not all in our historical past, you know, it's ongoing colonization of Māori, but also of our Pacific neighbors. And if people understood this context, then they might find it easier to understand
Mm.
what's happening in our daily situations and what's happening with the Cook Islands. as well.
Yeah, and you know, since we've been talking about farming quite a bit, right? Ngaru is another island nation in the Pacific that we've just totally destroyed. The islands of Ngaru. Look them up. Just destroyed them because we essentially like bottom trawled their shorelines for phosphate. We've now gone to Western Sahara, right, for phosphate, and we're calling it blood phosphate because it's fueling conflicts over there at the moment. But in Ngaru, it had it's the bird feces, I think, was building up in their shoreline, and that has been used as a fertilizer, phosphate. But we've totally destroyed those islands.
Wow.
To the point where we can't extract any more phosphate from there. That's why now we've gone over to the Western Sahara to get our phosphate, and we're contributing. It's considered a conflict mineral over there, but our industries are happy to purchase it from there because we've already destroyed the local islands that have sources of phosphate. And you know, phosphate, if you don't know, it's used by the animal agricultural industry on the pastures. Without phosphates, we would not have the green pastures that we have. So, of course, we have to colonize other islands and contribute to international wars. But this shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. You know, I don't want people to be too overwhelmed in terms of the shortcomings of the agricultural sector. You know, they are our biggest sector. You know, of course, there's going to be awful things to do with that sector. You know, it's is it all doom and gloom? Yes, it is. Don't be overwhelmed.
I mean, you were trying to make this better.
Everything goes back to colonization and agriculture. You know, they're the same things. And when it comes to ongoing colonization happening here in Aotearoa or other countries that we impact, it's often linked with our agricultural sector.
And if you think he's wild, look up the etymology of the word colony, because it actually originated as the meaning for farm, or specifically retired Roman soldiers who set up farms as their garrisons in the new lands that they colonized. So he's not exaggerating when he says that colonization is agriculture.
We never exaggerate.
Very closely connected, because they needed to go out and grab more land to grow more products. It's a part of capitalism as well. Capitalism and agriculture, very closely united.
Killed it. Thank you. Oh, right. So lots of groups, teacher groups, are very upset. Here's an article from RNZ. Education Minister on insulting curriculum review. The RNZ article said that compulsory Shakespeare and grammar lessons are included in a rewrite of the English curriculum up to year 13 as proposed by the Ministerial Advisory Group appointed by Erica Stanford.
They're not very original, are they?
Yeah. The group that involves Elizabeth Rata.
Right.
Now, originally, this Ministerial Advisory Group was only meant to be looking at the curriculum for English and maths, primary schools only, for certain years, but then their scope got extended. Okay, so it was quite tight what this advisory group was going to be looking at originally, but slowly we've been seeing their scope widen. And Pip Tinning, president of the New Zealand Association for the Teaching of English, which represents thousands of teachers in 400 schools, says the rewrite is being done in secret and is insulting to teachers. Then, leaked emails on rewriting curriculum show process not followed by the Teachers Association. The emails, which were sent to RNZ anonymously and dating from early April, show members of the Ministerial Advisory Group on English and Maths were placed on the teams charged with writing the curriculums and expected to approve who the other members would be. Now, there is public sector guidelines that explicitly says that these types of advisory positions are not meant to be involving themselves in these ways. They have been breaching their mandate, this advisory group, essentially breaching their mandate. And this has been exposed in OIAs, that they've been breaching their mandate and acting outside of their scope but there's been no punishment. I've seen no reprimanding. I've seen no one lose their jobs, that's for sure. Still just chipping away.
So Elizabeth Rata is part of this group that's reviewing our curriculum.
They're an advisory group of the Ministry of Education. The Ministry of Education is, they're reviewing everything. They're doing everything. And this is just meant to be an advisory group. They're meant to offer advice. But if you look at what their scope is, it does include, it says where appropriate, being able to offer up draft examples to put to the ministers.
Right. So beyond advice.
But it's a little bit later in the story, but there is a beautiful piece done by Bevan Holloway. And Bevan Holloway, I didn't have time myself to look into all of the OIAs, but the way that Bevan describes it, it's a clear case of bureaucratic takeover by a special interest group. Regardless of what you agree with in terms of their educational ideas, their actions are a threat to democracy and should be alarmed, and we should be alarmed by the ease with which they have been able to achieve it.
Yeah.
So Bevan Holloway has looked through all of these OIAs. I'm trying to summarize them, but they do a better job on their website. I highly recommend, if you're interested in this topic, to look at the OIAs to understand how this ministerial advisory group has been acting outside of their scope. Okay. Definitely check it out.
So what he points out is such a massive issue, and it's across all the topics that we talk about, but the ease with which this government has been able to take over our so-called democratic institutions, for me, just highlights the fact that we never really had democratic institutions to begin with. Because democratic institutions have checks and balances to stop this sort of thing from happening.
Well, if I take it back one, we have Pip talking about, Pip says, normally the Education Ministry would ask the sector for nominations for a curriculum writing group, so they have a curriculum writing group, a separate curriculum writing group, and the advisory group is meant to be separate to that, right? So normally they are able to put forward nominations or able to discuss possible members with the association. And normally the ministry keeps teachers informed on progress. Okay. She goes on to say, she said none of that had happened, and the emails indicated the ministerial advisory group, not the ministry, was overseeing the curriculum changes. So she's saying all of this has been done in the dark. Teachers are not being kept informed. And that, normally the ministry works with these teacher associations and whatnot on these things. Normally, these are collective decisions, and the advisory group gives advice. But what we're seeing is this advisory group are kind of jumping over everyone because, they're more interested in their own individual expertise on the matter. And because they're colonial white supremacists, they think their point of view is greater than the point of view of the collective.
Yeah.
Right? So they think that everything's okay for them to ignore, our largest teacher unions, our largest teacher associations, and to just run with their own agenda. Right? Now, because of everything that's happened, this is reported in RNZ, the emails also show at least one member of the advisory group rejected the Treaty of Waitangi as a basis for including Māori writers among the works children should read at school, saying quality was the only reason to include them. The identity of the person writing that statement was not included in the information sent to RNZ.
Rata.
Probably Rata. So, that's her thing. Even though we've collectively agreed that there is benefit to something, she is making the dictatorial kind of call to go over the top of that and say, no, the only thing that is relevant is expertise.
And in that interview that Elizabeth Rata did with that YouTuber, she explicitly says that personal experience is not important, and what's more important is to have an expert who doesn't have to have experienced it themselves to come and authoritatively tell everyone in the classroom what to think. And she explicitly says we need to teach children to be able to put their emotions aside. That's a direct quote. Teaching children to put their emotions aside as they just take in and accept what this person who may be telling them something that doesn't reflect their own life experience. So for example, and this is why I think she talks about personal experience so much, this idea of hiring people from certain backgrounds to fill certain public service roles, this idea came from the thinking that people having personal experience in certain things makes them more knowledgeable on these things. So we need people who are Māori in education spaces because they understand the experience of being Māori and they understand colonization on a personal level. And she's coming on top of that and she's saying that doesn't matter. We can have someone like me, a white expert, who completely disagrees with your life experience. And if I'm put as a position as the authority, everyone must listen to me and put their own life experience aside.
White supremacist. Okay. And so the New Zealand Teachers Association for Teaching English, due to the unreliability of the Ministry of Education, the ad hoc directives they seem to be issued with, and the increasing concern that NZATE will be represented as agreeing to what is being developed, we have decided to step back from working with the Ministry of Education at this time. So there were all sorts of things that the Ministry of Education was doing in terms of making expectations to this group, like giving them a very, very short time to give feedback on things. There was something like a 120-page document that they were asked to give feedback on, and they like workshopped it in like a 90-minute Zoom call or something like that.
Wow.
Or maybe it wasn't a Zoom call, but a 90-minute meeting to workshop this 120-page document. And they got fed up with the process. Another thing that this group created was a book list. And the book list was a book list listing which books teachers are currently using. But the Ministry of Education decided to run with, or this working group, I assume, decided to run with it as a list of recommended reading. But it was simply the books that were in circulation or being used at the time. And they were framing it as recommended reading, and from what I read, it looked like, as is pointed out in here, that NZATE are kind of seen to be agreeing with that process. So they've walked away. One of the biggest teacher organizations just walked away from the Ministry of Education because of what's going on.
And so this is across various subjects.
At the moment, they're talking about the English. The refresh
right.
of
so it's not even Māori
yeah.
history or anything like that.
Yeah, at the moment, they're talking about the refresh of the English curriculum. But what we're seeing is that Elizabeth Rata and this ministerial advisory group is that they're not working with appropriate teacher associations. They're not following process.
Yeah.
Their scope and their mandate is being increased. So we might receive announcements and things,
right?
But and think, oh, okay, that's the scope that they're operating within. But then that's being expanded. So maybe they're going to make an announcement around the history curriculum that we think is okay, but through the whakapapa of this group and understanding how they operate in the shadows, in the dark. And what comes out on paper may not be the next steps. You know, we may not be privy to the next steps. We may not be privy to the process. What these teacher organizations have been finding out as well is that there are gaps in information, which suggests that the ministerial advisory group is trying to keep a limited paper trail. And a lot of this stuff we only know because of OIAs. And, you know, some teachers have approached us with some juicy bits of information. I'm not going to share them because I thought, you know, if it's not out in public, there could be risks. But I am expecting a lot of interesting things to come out in the next couple months regarding this. Very tempted to get, but we just can't do it. But be aware, e te iwi, that the curriculum is changing, that the ministerial advisory group who is reviewing the curriculum is full of shady characters who are acting outside of their scope, who are not collectively working with those who are going to be most impacted by the changes that they are making. And that some of our biggest teacher organizations have been walking away from this process. And that's just going to make it worse, I imagine. The less involved they are in this process, the worse it's going to be. But this particular organization, they knew that their feedback wasn't going to be taken on. They knew that their feedback was then going to go through other groups and get filtered down. So they have said, we're just going to follow the public process. Once the final draft is out in the public, that's when we're going to give our feedback, because we don't want to give our feedback in the shadows and then for you guys to alter that and then to make it look like we've agreed with your changes.
Yeah.
So kia hiwara, e te iwi. Be mindful, be careful. Changes are coming. But I think considering we know the characters who are involved in these changes, there should be a fair degree of spotlight on it. So hopefully we're able to keep the public abreast with the latest developments. It's something I'm very interested in. But that's it. That's it for my kōrero on the school curriculum. Hopefully people found it informative. The history changes are the things that I'm most looking forward to. I think that's got huge potential to revolutionize things here in Aotearoa.
Wait, the history changes that are...
The positive changes.
But they're gone.
Well, they're still there. They're still
not
there.
gone yet.
Yeah. They're currently being taught right now.
Right, and they want to remove it.
Yes. There is currently it started being taught, I think, in 2023.
Yeah.
There were delays because of COVID, so some schools only started running with the new history curriculum at the start of 2024. But yeah, history is changing. Our understanding of history at the moment in Aotearoa is changing, and it's a beautiful thing. But there is some kind of a refresh coming.
Yeah. And even the refresh when it comes to other subject matters, like you saw, they had an opinion about Māori works being offered in English class.
Yeah.
And the type of readings and subject matter that they choose for English also has the capacity to colonize minds, right? So it's all of the subjects are important. And even, putting Māori issues aside, we should all be concerned about the quality of the curriculum for our children. And we should all be concerned that, this small segment of society has taken over our curriculum. And, when you were reading before, someone who wrote the article said, the small group taking over. Who do they mean by the small group? Do they mean...
this MAG Ministerial Advisory Group.
But is it he referred to them as like a sector of society or something. I can't remember the exact words. But who does he mean by that? Is it because she's aligned with Don Brash and those people?
Of course, yeah. I mean, the New Zealand Institute. In terms of MAG, this Ministerial Advisory Group, it's got Elizabeth Rata, Free Speech Union, Melissa Derby, Free Speech Union, the chair, Michael Johnson, I think, but most of them are from New Zealand Institute. And what does the New Zealand Institute do? They're just another one of those right-wing groups who push neoliberal policies. So that's the group I think she's talking about, this Bevan. I'm aroha mai, not sure if they're a he or a her or a shim. But that's the group they're talking about. The sector of society who are pushing for neoliberal policies, free capitalism, free market capitalism.
So special interest group. And I think you told me as well that she's been referred to as the male Don Brash.
The female.
As the female Don Brash. So Elizabeth Rata.
The
female Don Brash.
She's been described as the female Don Brash and also the academic female version of Winston Peters, which I wasn't going to say it, but yeah, it's funny. But yeah.
Okay. So that's the special interest group that he's referring to.
Yeah, and what she's talking about, democracy. Why is she talking so much about democracy, but then she shows these traits of hers to just go over the top of people and prioritize the individual over the collective. Democracy is all meant to be all about the collective.
Well, it's the same case as this government, right? Their whole campaign was about democracy, but everything that they've done has been anti-democratic. And in fact, they want to restructure our government so that it becomes less democratic in general. And that's what Rob Campbell's talking about.
And I just want to say as well, just the comment that's on screen. biggest issue was resourcing for teachers to use. There was a report done by ERO, the Education Review Office, I think, which Erica Stanford talked about in her AM show interview. In the report, the main thing that they highlighted was lack of resourcing for teachers and that teachers need more resources. But by and large, the report said, I think it was 9 out of 10 teachers were enjoying teaching the curriculum. There was a bigger uptake from Māori and Pacifica in classes as well.
Yeah.
It showed a lot of positive things, but the main thing was that further resourcing needs to be done. They did say as well in that review that there needs to be a little bit more global context, which is kind of like what you were talking about, in terms of how that refrigeration, shipment, that's the global context, us colonizing our lands to be the farm for the international, people understanding that localism and that context of a globalized market, I think would be a great thing. But anyway, she used that review to essentially say that things need to change.
Mm-hmm.
So even though the trajectory was looking good and all she needed to do was provide further resourcing for the teachers, she used it as a way to say, the review said there needs to be some changes, so we're going to make some changes.
And that has been consistent across a number of areas that this government has looked at. They've looked at a review, or they've done a review, they've found something that they say is wrong in it, which you can find in any organization ever. And then they say that's the reason that we need to come in and restructure it to put their special interest group in charge. So it's been a consistent message from them. And similar arguments made in the stories that I was going to cover, but now I'm thinking that we call it.
Switching it up.
Because my topic is also really large.
Kapai.
And I just feel like sitting with what you've talked about today, if you want to have more discussions about it, and maybe doing another special episode tomorrow, specifically for the stuff that I have prepared, because I've got like 70 slides.
70 slides.
and Pere had less than me, so.
Yeah, I had 40 slides, but we really talked a lot on each slide.
Yeah. What do you think?
I think I'm happy to call it here, and we can do another episode soon. It's really important when you're talking school lunches and everything that's going on there. I was looking forward to hearing your report.
Yeah, I was looking forward to giving it, but yeah, I just think it'll get too long and a bit boresome for our viewers, and I want us to stick to 2 hours, and if that means doing numerous episodes a week, which we might have to, we might have to start adding another day, because, and I think that will actually help us, not increase our workload. I actually think it will help our workload because we're still doing the same amount of work, but trying to cram it in 2 hours is quite stressful. And I think if we, my stuff is ready to go, we can just hop on here and talk about it tomorrow, because it is a really important topic.
Kabai, what have we got on tomorrow night? Don't want to say we're going to do it tomorrow and then find out we got something on.
Okay, we'll watch the space anyway. We'll
tomorrow night. I think we've got nothing on. How about tomorrow night? We do tomorrow
night.
Lock
it in, fam. Lock it in.
6 p.m. 6 p.m. tomorrow night.
But is there anything else that you want to talk about before we shut down today's kōrero?
Putting me on the spot here.
I did have a note.
Oh, you've got something you want to talk about. How do I?
Just at the beginning, we saw that Labour's new strategy is just to be national light, to just continue the policies of national. One thing I wanted to say about that is I think that the media is going to start playing nice with Labour from now on. And I think the reason that they're going to do that is because they want to disincentivize people from going to Te Pāti Māori and Greens. And so I think they're going to sense the atmosphere. They're going to feel that people are coming off national a little bit. And the media is going to try and match that energy by being a little bit nicer to Labour. And even yesterday's clip about Labour, I thought was, the tone was not as anti-Labour
some compliments
as previously.
To Chippy.
Yeah, and and they're describing them as stable government. And they're saying, oh, they're right, they are stable, and they're agreeing with that. And I think that they're going to use that to try and make sure that the next government is not too left. And so, all these our mainstream media funded by millionaires, billionaires, people who have an interest in neoliberal capitalism, they don't want things to change too drastically. Labour is obviously not going to change things too drastically. They're coming out and openly saying so. And in their last term, you know, they initiated the biggest transfer of wealth from rich to poor since, you know, earlier days of colonization. So we're not expecting too much from Labour. But yeah, I do think that the media is going to start being a little bit nicer to them in an attempt to put us off Labour and Greens. And the flip side of that, I think the media is going to go so hard against the Greens and Māori party leading up to the election.
Definitely. Because really, Labour is just the other side of the coin, really. You know, they do have a lot of differences, but on real big things, Labour and National tend to agree. So that sudden switch from the media to start, you know, bigging up Labour, it's not a big surprise. You know, it's pretty run-of-the-mill normal, the jump between parties. You know, you get frustrated with one party, okay, jump to the other one. We can just keep everything roughly the same-ish without any radical change. But yeah, when they start being nice to Pāti Māori and the Greens, that'll be when things really have changed. But to see the media language switch up for Labour, I think is run-of-the-mill democracy in Aotearoa.
Swing with the public with that one, hey. But they will not ever validate people who like the Greens into Pāti Māori. We will forever be otherized. And what's interesting is that the Greens actually have a higher percentage than ACT, but for all of the reasons. ACT is treated like a reasonable, rational, normal party, while Greens are otherized and made out to be extreme. So it's not about them respecting what New Zealanders think. They don't equally respect all the voters. That's not what it's about.
Mauri ora. Good whakaaro there to end on. Hope you enjoy the rest of your night. We got the rest of Saturday night to go and do something. Woo! What are we going to do?
There's still some light outside here, which is quite cool.
Wow. Well, nice. We can go have a little bit of a blat in the garden, maybe.
A blat in the garden.
Ka pai. Another big thank you to Tulua Wilson for being our comment moderator. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. We always offer up the comment moderator role to people if people just want to be involved and give that helping hand. We always really appreciate it. And we want to try and involve people in various roles and things like that. So if you want to help out, just, you know, send us a message. We'd really love to have you on the team. Any other closing whakaaro?
That's it. Just, yeah, thanks everyone for tuning in. And yeah, we do know that we need to clip our videos to get views, that most people will not come to watch a 2 and 3 hour group. We will get there.
We will.
We're still sort of learning. And that's why, like, we just really appreciate you guys just showing up and being here while we're learning and giving us feedback. It's truly amazing.
Yeah. I feel like these are like our pilot episodes or something, you know? And like maybe like season 2 of the All Report. We're going to have like an actual studio, you know, maybe we'll run like a crowdfunding campaign so that we don't have our streaming site in our bedroom. Yeah, but we're looking to develop, and just thank you to everyone for your feedback. We really appreciate it. But that's it from the two of us. Thanks again for coming. Kia pai te pō. Have a good night, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Mauri ora, everyone. Good night.
Ka kite. Have a good night, everyone. Thanks for being here.